Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're looking into a really interesting conversation between Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, it covered a lot of ground, didn't it?
It really did. And our goal here, well, our mission, is to pull out some of the surprising facts, the thought-provoking ideas about how we interact, what motivates us, basically the stuff shaping our world.
Right, but presented clearly,
Yeah.
without getting totally bogged down in, academic jargon or endless detail.
Exactly. So let's jump in. One of the first things that really stood out was their take on play.
Play. And it's not just like kids running around in the playground, is it?
Yeah.
They see it as something much more fundamental.
Yeah, like the bedrock of micro-communities, friendships, even starting in childhood.
For you, the listener, the key thing they're getting at is how voluntary play, just choosing to play, builds those basic social skills you need for, well, any community to actually work. Freedom and choice are core to it.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. It's more than just having fun then. There's a psychological aspect, even biopsychological.
Definitely. Peterson points out it has to be voluntary. You really can't force someone to play, not truly. And he calls it motivationally fragile.
Motivationally fragile, what does that mean exactly?
Well, basically any stronger feeling, like fear or hunger or anger, it just shuts down the play circuit instantly.
Okay, that makes sense. You need the right conditions.
Precisely. And they use this analogy, which I think helps you picture it, a walled garden.
A walled garden, like a safe zone.
Exactly. A predictable, protected space where that fragile play motivation can actually, take root and not get stomped on by other stuff.
And because it's voluntary, that's where the tyranny point comes in.
Right. They frame it as the absolute opposite of coercion, the antithesis of tyranny. And this isn't just for kids. Even in adult relationships, that simple phrase, hey, let's have some fun, can be a way to break down dominance games.
It's about fostering real connection, not control. Now, here's something that might make you think. They talk about how play evolves, it gets more complex.
Yeah, mature play. It was like, say, a good marriage.
Yeah.
It takes work, discipline, learning. It's sophisticated engagement. But the payoffs are way higher.
And speaking of marriage, did you catch that statistic they dropped? It was kind of surprising.
Oh, yeah. The one about religious married couples reporting they have the most sex.
That's the one. It certainly pushes against some common ideas, doesn't it?
It really does. And that kind of flows naturally into their next big topic.
Yeah.
Parenthood. The huge transformation that comes with it.
Often following that marriage commitment, especially when a child is actually on the way, the commitment deepens somehow.
Right. It's not just signing a paper. It's this shared massive responsibility, creating life together.
And the shift in perspective, Rogan talked about that, didn't he? How having kids just changes how you see everyone.
Yeah, this sudden realization that everyone you meet, no matter how old or, imposing, they were all tiny babies once, completely vulnerable.
And that fosters more empathy, more charitable interpretation of why people do things.
Exactly. Giving people the benefit of the doubt more often. Rogan quoted Dave Chappelle, which I thought was perfect for you listening.
Oh, what was the quote again?
Having children didn't just change the amount of love I have. It changed my capacity for love.
Wow. So it's not just more love, it's a fundamentally different kind of love or ability to love.
Precisely. A qualitative shift. They even called parenthood a psychedelic experience.
Huh. That's quite a statement. But it underlines how much it shifts your worldview.
Totally. And it's seen as this, biological bedrock for community.
Yeah.
That protective instinct kicks in, and it can even extend outwards beyond your immediate family, sort of tribal.
Okay, so this intense love, this protective instinct, it radiates out. But then they mentioned something kind of, well, shocking.
What was that?
The idea that maybe a lot of people, they just haven't seen healthy couple dynamics, civilized interactions between partners.
Right. That was quite startling. The idea that just watching Peterson and his wife interact functionally on stage during lectures could have such a positive effect. It suggests a real lack of good models out there for some people.
It really makes you wonder. They contrasted it with some negative examples, too.
Yeah, like the public dynamic between Alec Baldwin and his wife sometimes, or the really tragic, toxic situation with Phil Hartman and his wife.
It highlights that fear people have, doesn't it? Getting trapped in a relationship that's all about control, maybe even public humiliation.
Definitely. If your main examples are dysfunctional, well, that might become your unconscious template.
Which leads nicely into another area they explored, something relevant to pretty much everyone, status versus reputation.
Yes, the status game. Trying to climb the ladder.
And the point they made is that chasing status, It just doesn't satisfy. Even if you win, it feels kind of icky.
Yeah, gross was the word Rogan used, I think.
Yeah.
Because often status battles involve putting others down to lift yourself up. Inherently negative, like that whole Carlos Mencia situation Rogan got into years ago, the difficulty of those public conflicts.
Whereas reputation, that's different.
Completely. Reputation is something you earn through your actions, your contributions. It's built, not just claimed.
Mhm.
So it feels more solid, more valuable.
They used that analogy from the Gospels, didn't they, about treasure?
Right, storing up treasure in heaven.
Yeah.
They interpreted that as building an unimpeachable reputation, something internal that can't easily be taken away by external stuff.
That's a powerful way to think about it. But even reputation can become a game, right?
Oh, for sure. And there's a biological element, too.
Yeah.
As your reputation grows, Peterson mentioned, your serotonin tends to go up, which can make you less sensitive to negative feedback, ironically. So you keep chasing that reputational high.
So the key is how you build it.
Exactly.
Uh,
Is it built through a genuine quest, like seeking knowledge, understanding, and bringing your audience along, sharing the journey?
Like Peterson framed his lecture as a shared exploration.
Yeah. Or is it just power games driven by insecurity, which they argue gets way worse online?
Social media. Anonymity, no real consequences.
Makes it easy to posture, to play status games without actually earning anything. Which brings us to a pretty dark topic they touched on.
The psychopathic influence idea.
Yeah. How virtualization and social media might be enabling people with certain personality traits. They proposed this new theory, kind of beyond just woke ideology or specific political labels.
What's the core idea for you, the listener?
It's that certain individuals, maybe those with traits of cluster B personality disorders, histrionic, narcissistic, antisocial, psychopathic, plus the dark tetrad traits like Machiavellianism and sadism.
Okay.
These individuals are naturally drawn to power, and they'll latch onto whatever ideology is currently dominant, not because they believe it, but as a vehicle for their own narcissistic supply, like modern-day Pharisees in their analogy.
So it's not about the ideology itself, but how it's used by these specific personality types.
Pretty much. The ideology becomes a tool for personal gain, for power, for control. The real challenge then becomes spotting these psychopathic parasites, as Peterson termed them, within any movement.
Because narcissists want unearned praise and psychopaths are predatory.
Or parasitic. And sadism adds that element of enjoying others' suffering, especially if it's undeserved. Online environments, again, just make it easier because there's less accountability.
Is this a new problem, though?
Not entirely. They brought up anti-Semitism as a historical example, suggesting part of it was driven by resentment of a successful minority. It's just that the mechanisms might be changing or accelerating online. Navigating it is super complex.
Yeah, you can see how tricky that gets, distinguishing real issues from manipulation.
Which leads into the whole mess of information and trust today.
Right. Peterson talked about his own journey, suddenly having this huge platform and trying to figure out who to trust, how to stay skeptical, but also have some guardrails.
And you see this reflected everywhere, don't you? The breakdown of trust in legacy media. He mentioned losing faith in the New York Times, for instance.
And they threw out that pretty provocative idea about Watergate maybe being an intel op.
Yeah, that was definitely an ooh, okay moment. It just highlights the level of questioning going on.
Yeah.
And look at COVID-19.
How the narrative shifted, the government responses, the censorship claims.
Right. The White House messaging versus, say, Spotify's approach.
Yeah.
And then you have things like the lab leak theory, initially dismissed, now popping up on government websites again.
It's confusing for people, and some folks faced real consequences for saying things back then that are now considered more plausible. Makes it hard for you to know what's what.
Definitely creates a difficult landscape. And this ties into their concerns about what they see as potential ideological tyranny.
They use Mark Carney as an example, right?
Yeah.
The former Bank of England governor.
Yeah. His push for ESG, environmental, social, governance, plus DEI, net zero. Very strong advocacy for centralized planning around climate.
Saying things like, every financial decision has to prioritize decarbonization, keep most fossil fuels in the ground.
And they drew a parallel there, didn't they? Between the climate narrative and the COVID narrative.
How so?
In the way dissent gets suppressed, the use of fear, maybe compulsion, the idea that the climate apocalypse narrative could be, well, useful for those seeking power, narcissists, maybe.
Even down to small things, like showerhead regulations, petty tyranny, they called it.
Right. It prompts you to question the motivations behind some of these big pushes.
From there, the conversation shifted again towards something deeper, meaning sacrifice.
Using the story of Abraham, not just as an ancient text, but as an allegory.
Hmm.
A call to adventure, really.
An adventure that leads to self-blessing, but also blessing the world, that five-part covenant idea.
Yeah, this concordance between your own development and the good of the world. There's an instinct for that kind of growth, they argue, which is healthier than just a pure power drive.
Hedonism versus adventure, basically. Pleasure-seeking versus meaningful striving.
Which brought up Andrew Tate.
Ugh.
Yes, a controversial figure. How did he fit in?
As someone appealing to young men who feel lost, maybe offering an alternative to being an incel, but perhaps an incomplete one.
Incomplete how?
Well, maybe focusing too much on a purely aggressive masculine persona without integrating the shadow, as Jung would say, or the more traditionally feminine traits, empathy, compassion.
So it's a process. You might go from feeling weak, maybe overcompensating, to being a monster, but the real goal is integration, becoming more effective and balanced.
Exactly. They used Georges St. Pierre, the fighter, as an example of someone who seemed to integrate that discipline and skill with, being a decent human being. It's about ongoing self-improvement, following what calls to you.
A burning bush idea.
Yeah, the compelling inner call, which leads into another big archetypal story, Moses.
As a leadership pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
Starts with self-discipline, like being a shepherd. Then following that compelling call, the transformation, confronting tyranny Pharaoh and leading people towards a better future, the promised land. And the role of ordinary masculinity in that, protecting the vulnerable.
Yeah, but needing integration with the civilized side, as they put it, not just raw force. They even mused about the burning bush and maybe psychedelic connections, though that was more speculative.
It's all about these deep stories, isn't it? Cain and Abel, too.
The importance of bringing your best offering, making a real sacrifice, as the foundation for a just society, which culminates, in their view, in the example of Christ's voluntary self-sacrifice.
These ancient narratives just keep resonating, shaping how we think about ourselves and community.
Absolutely. Like the 12 Scout story. 10 come back afraid, paralyzed by the challenges ahead.
But 2, Caleb and Joshua, have faith, courage, see the potential. It's about adopting that hopeful, courageous stance towards the future.
Which seems pretty relevant right now.
Definitely. Bringing it to the present, they talked about Peterson Academy.
Yeah, as a potential alternative to traditional universities, which they see as having problems.
Yeah.
It grew out of his own journey, going from obscurity to this global platform.
Facing a lot of misrepresentation, he said, but still wanting to educate.
He mentioned the pain of seeing widespread demoralization, but also the hope from seeing individual transformations, the power of truth-telling against totalitarian tendencies.
It's weird how even things like diet, the carnivore diet came up, becomes so polarized.
Totally surreal. But they also pointed to positive things, like maybe grassroots health movements, innovative farming, that rice and crayfish thing.
Oh yeah, integrated farming, cool stuff.
And Peterson noting fewer people seeming distressed at his live events now compared to a few years ago. Hearing personal stories of change, that must be intense.
Yeah, he spoke about the weight of responsibility, but also seeing it as an opportunity when it's voluntarily undertaken.
Avoiding crippling self-consciousness by focusing on the quest, the bigger aim. The spirit of your aim is what answers your prayers, was a striking line.
It suggests your intention shapes your reality in a way.
And the importance of listening, asking questions, versus just following, well, false prophets or gurus, which loops back to that parasite idea.
The eternal struggle against parasites. Even biologically, like sex being an evolutionary defense.
Right, and applying that metaphorically to institutions, academia, media, science, politics, where people might exploit systems, often using false claims of victimhood.
That's a tricky area, the danger of naive empathy, maybe, not distinguishing real victims from manipulators.
Exactly. They use Pinocchio and Jonah as stories about rescuing truth or potential from decaying structures from the belly of the beast.
They also touched on universities, again, the gender imbalance, women potentially being more susceptible to manipulation due to maybe a stronger nurturing ethos.
It was a sensitive point, but linked to observing how some academics just laugh dismissively when challenged, suggesting they're benefiting from a broken system, the feeling that traditional universities might be kind of irreparable.
Leading to the need for alternatives. They even mentioned predictors of politically correct authoritarianism.
Lower verbal intelligence, certain demographics, exposure to certain courses, and this idea of tyrannical compassion.
Tyrannical compassion, like misplaced empathy causing harm.
Yeah, like in the Adam and Eve story, maybe enabling the snake out of misplaced kindness or naivete about genuine malevolence, the dangers of identity politics, extremes?
It's a complex critique. They offered some signs of tyranny too, didn't they?
Yeah, simple things. Widespread fear, compulsion being used, hatred of comedians, even hatred of cars, oddly enough.
Huh. Okay. But they didn't end on a totally bleak note.
No, definitely not. They pointed to positive signs, too. A return to more conservative churches, maybe the climate apocalypse narrative weakening, new initiatives like ARC emerging.
ARC, that Alliance for Responsible Citizenship.
Right, and the sheer potential for abundance through innovation and cooperation if we can get things right. But it takes faith and courage, like Caleb and Joshua.
So wrapping this all up, the core message for you listening is what?
I think it's that understanding human behavior, community, society.
Yeah.
It's complex. You got to look under the surface. These deep principles, play, sacrifice, reputation, dealing with malevolence, they're always at work.
So we really encourage you to chew on these ideas. Think about play in your life. Think about empathy, status versus purpose. How do you navigate information and trust?
Yeah, what really stuck with you? What questions pop up? Maybe dig deeper into some of these stories or thinkers yourself.
And maybe a final thought for you to take away.
Hmm.
In this world full of competing stories, different kinds of control, how can we individually find that Caleb and Joshua mindset, that mix of clear-eyed realism but also courageous hope to actually build something better?
That's the big question, isn't it? How to face the future constructively.